this presentation alone doesn't serve as enough training to be considered necessarily competent in treating gambling disorder, but it definitely will get you started. And if it's something you're interested in learning more about, we have resources at the end for more trainings you can attend if this is something you resonate with or you just want to learn more about. And there will be some gambling pictures and videos in this presentation. So if that is something that might bother you, please just feel free to step aside and take care of yourself. But we will be looking at some gambling ads and some gambling videos. So if that's something that you're uncomfortable with, just turn the camera off, walk away for a few minutes. It'll be really brief. Here are some of the learning objectives that we'll be talking about today. Understanding, the intersection between gambling addiction and substance use, talking a little bit about how sports betting intersects with gambling disorder, and best practices that Recovery House can use to help with gambling disorder or to talk about it. And then lastly, sharing any resources in Ohio that we have for you that if you're interested, you can, learn more on your own time. I had to put our dogs in here. Me and Kelly are big dog people. So I feel like anytime I'm introducing myself, I have to introduce my dogs too. So this is just a little bit about me and my two dogs, Lily and Luna. And then here's Kelly with her two dogs, which that's an old picture. They're way bigger now. Kelly, did you want to share anything about your bio info?
Yeah, I love that about Megan and myself. We really are dog people, and that's one of the cool things that we've been working on at the Zeph Center is bringing therapy dogs into the Zeph Center. It's been a little bit of a battle, but I am doing prevention at the Zeph Center, so I have a little bit more accessibility and availability to bring my dogs in, but we're hoping down the road that Megan will be able to bring her dogs in the problem gambling individual counseling and group sessions. So it's something that anybody who knows dogs, they break down barriers, they decrease anxiety, decrease depression. So we're really hoping that that's going to kind of continue to move forward with us. So my disclaimer is I am outside, hoping my puppies are going to remain on the quiet side, and if not, I will be muting myself. So thanks for having us, everybody.
And that's something I'll point out too, is that Kelly is in prevention and I'm in treatment. So I think you'll get a really well-rounded perspective on gambling disorder. I'm a counselor in the gambling treatment program. So every single person I see has a diagnosis of gambling disorder. But I mean, at least 80% of them are also in recovery from another addiction too. And so while everyone I work with has a gambling disorder, we also are well aware that usually that comes along with another set of problems, whether it's mental health or substance use. So we're not anti-gambling in any way. We're just pro-responsibility, helping clients, helping residents identify if gambling's a responsible choice for them in their recovery, or if it's a behavior that's going to lead to a relapse in the future. That's for them to decide. It's our job to educate them, to inform them, to help them reflect on their own behaviors, and ultimately let them decide for themselves what place gambling has or doesn't have in their life. So here's this first objective: understand the definition of gambling addiction and its intersection with substance use disorder. And first, if you guys are available to use the chat, I'd like you to maybe put one or two things here in the chat of what is gambling? What comes to mind when you think of gambling? Is it a certain type of gambling? And if so, what? So if you guys are able to type in the chat box, or in the question box, I can see that. So I see lottery, an addiction. Is anything else coming through for you guys?
Well, I'm glad to at least see the addiction part, because a lot of times when we talk about gambling or gaming or sports betting, people really don't want to take ownership that it is an addiction. And Megan's going to talk about that as far as the diagnosis goes. But people really struggle with the fact that it is a behavior-based addiction. It's not a substance addiction. It's not something you can ingest, but that really, I think, kind of messes with people's mind. So I'm glad to see that addiction piece.
And I see
So
a
the
couple
high
other
of
things.
chance,
Yep.
yeah. Entertainment, yep.
Yeah, absolutely. Alrighty. So what
Yes,
is
this
gambling?
is the chat box.
So this is what a lot of
Yeah.
people think of when they think of gambling, right? It's playing poker, playing roulette, slot machines, bingo, scratch off tickets, lottery. But gambling can also be sports betting or Keno or video gaming or even the stock market. So ultimately, gambling is risking anything of value on an event that is determined by chance. So it doesn't mean that you just gamble with money. You can gamble with jewelry, phones, cars, anything you value. You can gamble with your life. I have a lot of people that I work with who, when they were drinking or drugging, would say, you know, I was gambling with my life every time I got high. I was risking my life, not knowing if that was going to be the last time I got high or not. And so ultimately, gambling is risking anything you value on a game of chance. Where can you gamble? So go ahead and tell me where you can gamble in that chat box. Where are popular places to go and gamble? Let's see what a few people have to say.
And let me just point out, it's the questions box with go to as opposed to the chat box.
Okay, so go to the question box. Yep, Stephanie says casino, store, gas stations. Yep, online, gas stations, on your phone, in bars, casinos. Yeah, those carryout stores are really dangerous, especially for individuals living in recovery housing. A lot of times that's the closest place to maybe walk to get something that you need, but you know, scratch off tickets and lotteries also there too. Shirley said church.
I love this.
Yeah, a lot of
Yep,
gambling
I
goes
was
on
gonna
in
say.
church.
Yeah.
And Christina said racinos. Yep. Good. So you guys know a lot of this. Where can you gamble? Popular places, you know, the casinos. You can gamble at sporting events. You know, in some places you can even play at the pump while you're pumping your gas. Recovery, Philip said recovery events with 50-50. Yeah. I had a client I was working with probably about a year. Well, no, it must have been this past winter. It was a really bad snowstorm, and he went to an AA meeting, and they were taking bets on how many people would show up to the meeting. And it's an AA meeting, right? It wasn't Gamblers Anonymous, it was AA. But that kind of shows you the line of thinking that some people have, right? Of, well, that it's harmless. We're just making a bet. It's harmless. But for some people, it's extremely harmful. You can gamble on your phone. You can gamble in video games. If you've ever been to the grocery store, take a look at when you're leaving. You might see these vending machines for the Ohio Lottery. So even when you're trying to go get your bread and butter for the week, you might run into an Ohio Lottery vending machine. So it is very hard to avoid. You can gamble anywhere. And yes, people are gambling in your recovery houses. They're gambling on their phones. They're gambling on the sporting events. They're probably playing cards. So yeah, people are definitely gambling in your recovery houses. So this brings us to the next question of why gamble in a recovery house? Well, I asked a bunch of the people I work with who live in recovery housing who have gambled in their life, and this is what I got. It's already a hobby of mine. It's something I like to do. I gamble because I'm bored. There's nothing else to do. I'm on restriction. I can't leave. It's exciting. It gives me something to do, a way to fit in or bond with the other people at the house because they're asking me to play cards with them and I don't really have any support. So I'm taking them up on that offer. Hope is a big one. You know, all I need to do is win big one time, and then I'll have enough money to leave this recovery house, go buy myself a nice place, and I'll be set for life. There's this aspect of hope with a gambling addiction that isn't always present with other types of addiction. People gamble because they just need to win big one more time to change their life. It's fun. People gamble because it's fun, and it mimics the adrenaline rush or high of drinking and drugging. And the added plus is that when you ask me to do a urinalysis, it's not going to show up. I can't test your urine for gambling. So it's something that I can do that's fun, that gives me a little bit of a dopamine high, and it doesn't risk my eligibility to continue in treatment or to stay in recovery housing. And then lastly, a lot of people say switching addictions. A lot of people report, you know, I've always gambled and drank and drugged, but eventually my drinking and drugging, you know, ran over my gambling addiction, and all I would do is try and get high. But when I'm sober and I'm not drinking or drugging anymore, I want to start gambling again. Kelly, anything to add on that?
Yeah, it just reminded me, my background is doing a lot of work with high school students, and I worked in very rural counties, and I would always hear the parents say, well, I don't mind if my kids get drunk and their friends come over and get drunk because at least they're not shooting up. At least they're not, you know, smoking pot. At least they're not fill in the blanks. And I hear that a lot with people who are gambling. Hey, at least I'm not shooting up. At least I'm not getting high. And it's just a very interesting way to look at this because it still could potentially be an addiction. It's just the way that people view it. It's very interesting.
And the truth is that when we hear people say, well, at least I'm not getting high, that's actually not true. You are getting high. You're just not inserting alcohol or drugs into your body. We know that behaviors can trigger chemical responses in our brains, right? When we see our loved one that we haven't seen for a while, we're overjoyed with happiness. When we see a cute dog, we want to go up and pet it. You know, we know by now that behaviors themselves can trigger those chemical responses in the brain. You do not have to insert something into your body to get that. And there's actually plenty of research out there that would not only support that, but one specifically compared the brain of someone addicted to cocaine to the brain of someone addicted to gambling. And they basically took pictures of the brain when that person was high and when the other person was gambling, and the same parts of the brain lit up. And so we know by now that it doesn't have to be something that you swallow or inject or inhale for it to trigger a chemical response or a high. So here are some examples of what high-risk gambling or problem gambling might look like. You know, if any of your residents are exhibiting these symptoms, it's likely that they would probably meet criteria for a gambling disorder. If they're unable to pay their rent, but you see them consistently scratching off tickets, that's a red flag. If you see them opening a bunch of credit cards to fund their gambling, that's a red flag. If you see them gambling as a coping strategy, or they want to go to the casino or bet on the game or play a round of cards after they've had a really, really bad day, that's a red flag, right? If they're missing any important life events to go gambling, or they're gambling while they're drinking, drugging, or recovering from another mental health disorder, these are all things that could potentially lead you down the gambling addiction route. These are all red flags in and of themselves and would probably meet criteria for gambling disorder, depending on how long this has all been going on. And this is actually the video right here that I won't show because I feel like showing videos on webinars just never works out for anybody. But you have the handout, so if you want to watch it, it's about a 3-minute video where they show the brain on cocaine and the brain gambling and how similar parts of the brain light up. So you can watch that on your own if you are interested.
And I think something to note, particularly with this video, it's fascinating because it's not just the act of gambling, it is the anticipation of gambling. And my background is a lot working with people in recovery, kids and adults, and they talk about how excited they get. Those endorphins are being released while they are anticipating, while they're on their way, you know, to getting their drugs, while they're on their way to the casino. So it's not just the act of actually gambling or drinking or ingesting something, it's the anticipation. And I think a lot of people miss that. They think it's the act or the action, and it's not. It's leading up to that as well.
Yeah, you're right, Kelly. A lot of research will suggest that you get that dopamine high before you've even found out if you've won or lost, which is what kind of promotes the addiction cycle in gambling, is that you're getting that feel-good high before you've found out if you've won or lost. And so no matter if you win or lose, you already want to play again because you've already gotten that feel-good feeling from placing that bet without knowing the outcome of it at all. So there is definitely that anticipation effect. And some of my clients relate that to the hustle or the plan that they would make for themselves to go get their next drink or their next drug. They relate it to, you know, I remember what that felt like when I knew what my plan was to go get my next high and how that made me feel. And that's very similar to a problem gambler planning their next venture of gambling. So here's the DSM-5 criteria for gambling disorder. You can see that there's 9 criteria, and you have to meet at least 4 or more to have a gambling disorder. So nearly half, you need to meet nearly half of these criteria to actually have the diagnosis, which when it comes to looking at the similarities and differences with substance use disorder has 11 criteria and you only need to meet 2 of them. So it's actually a lot harder to meet criteria for a gambling disorder, which will mean if you have a gambling disorder diagnosis, you have probably earned it because you have to have at least 4, nearly half of these criteria being met for a 12-month period. This is something that we'll glaze over today because you can access this online or through your slides at any time. But what I do want to show you is a comparison of this criteria to substance use, just so you can see where they're similar and where they're different. So this is the criteria for gambling disorder, but in other words, for number 1, needing to gamble with more money in order to achieve the desired excitement, this is tolerance building. This is no different than needing to drink or drug more to get your desired high. For number 2, being restless or irritable when attempting to cut down or stop, this is withdrawal. Anytime they try to stop gambling, they become irritable, they become distressed, they become frustrated. It may not be what we look at as physical withdrawal with substances, but it is absolutely psychological withdrawal. And many of my clients will report a physical withdrawal of a headache or an upset stomach or lack of appetite. And so there is this withdrawal aspect of when I try and stop gambling, I get really uncomfortable and irritable and upset. Number 3, making repeated unsuccessful efforts to control, cut back, or stop. This is a failed effort to control. So this is when you ask your clients or your residents who drink or drug, have you ever tried to stop drinking? And they say, yeah, I've tried a million times. This is the same criteria, you just change drinking to gambling. Have you ever tried to quit gambling? I usually hear one of two things. I either hear, yes, I've tried to quit a million times and I can't, or I hear, no, I've never tried to stop because I never thought what I was doing was a problem. So I never thought I needed to do anything about it. Number 4, being preoccupied with gambling, thinking of gambling often. I think there's a criteria for that with the substance use disorder too. Are you preoccupied with when you can drink again, when you can drug again? Are you thinking of how you're going to get your next high? Are you thinking about gambling? And how often are you thinking about it? Number 5, gambles when feeling distressed. This could be helpless, guilty, anxious, depressed. This could be any negative emotion that your resident or client is experiencing. So this is the escape side of things. Are you gambling to relieve unpleasant emotions? Are you gambling to escape reality, to cope with your stressors? Number 6 is somewhat unique to gambling. It's unique to gambling in that there's not something as similar to it in substance use, but it's chasing your losses, which means if you have lost money gambling, you want to return as soon as possible to try and win back what you've lost, and usually more. So it's again furthering that addiction cycle of, well, I lost $50 yesterday, so I need to go back today and win 100 so I can win my 50 back and still make a profit. This is a very popular line of thinking with problem gamblers, is they're constantly keeping these numbers in their head that become more and more skewed over time. But it's this idea of I need to win back what I've lost, and then I need to win more, because more is never enough, right? Number 7 is also specific to gambling, lying. Have you ever lied to conceal the extent of involvement with gambling? I don't think lying is in the criteria for substance use disorder, but it is for gambling disorder, because lying is such a pivotal part of maintaining a gambling disorder. They often call gambling addiction the hidden addiction, and it's because you can't see it on me, you can't smell it on me. None of you would know if I just spent the last night at the casino or not unless you saw me there. I can lie about it. You can ask me to pee in a cup, nothing's going to show up. You can scrape under my fingernails for scratch off dust, nothing's going to show up. I can hide it super duper easily. So it's called the hidden addiction, and one reason it can be so hidden is because we will lie, and it's hard to catch us in a lie, because you can't tell if I'm lying or telling the truth. Lying is a huge part of gambling disorder. So if someone is lying about where they're going, how much money they're spending, how much money they're winning or losing, all of that would meet criteria for number 7. And number 8, this is, I believe, another criteria in substance use: jeopardizing or losing a significant relationship, job, or opportunity because of gambling. So, are your friends or family or partners upset with how you gamble? Are you gambling all your paychecks away and you're not able to pay your bills, or you're not going to work because you're gambling, or you're going in late? Have you spent your savings that was supposed to be for college tuition on gambling instead? How has gambling affected your life? Most people will easily meet this criteria. And lastly, number 9, relying on others to provide money. So these are financial bailouts. Have you ever asked somebody for money and haven't paid them back? And they'll say, well, yeah, but not for gambling. And I'll say, okay, well, for what? And they'll say, well, I needed money to pay my phone bill. I'm like, did you need money to pay your phone bill because you were gambling? And they'll say, well, yeah. Same thing. These are financial bailouts. Have you asked people to help you financially because you have spent too much money on your gambling? Okay, Kelly, do you want to cover this prevalence section?
Yes, absolutely. So when we look at prevalence, um, I'll be honest, I've been in this field, substance use and mental health field for a long time. When I was hired at Zeph and they said I'd be working in the problem gambling department, I literally was like, is that really a thing? I mean, I know substances are a thing. So I have learned a tremendous amount. Megan and I have gone to a lot of different trainings. Um, and it's kind of one of they call it the red sports car effect. So when you purchase a red sports car, it seems like everybody has a sports car now, that red sports car. Well, that's not true. It's just your perception has changed. So since I have learned so much about problem gambling, I see it everywhere. And again, being totally transparent, I think it was actually the year that I was hired at Zeph. Our kids were getting a little bit older and they never really wanted a lot of things for Christmas. So we were like, okay, let's get them a couple lottery tickets. That's kind of fun. So my husband and I go do the lottery tickets, the stocking stuffers. Well, then I find out as I'm learning about problem gambling, like that's a huge no-no. Megan just talked about, the big win and all, chasing your losses and all of that. And it's like, or chasing your wins. And it's like, wait a minute, that was a really, really bad decision on my part. Addiction runs in my family anyway. But when we look at prevalence, and hopefully after this training, you guys will see this where you'll see, wow, I remember that Megan said, when I'm pumping gas, if I want to be, doing some type of gambling, I can do it right here at the pump. Maybe you didn't notice that before. I never did. I never realized the marketing and the media, and especially now with sports betting, it's just insane how prevalent all of this is. So when we look at, and again, Megan mentioned this, we're not anti-gambling, we're not anti-gaming. We are helping you be aware of this. So on average, 80% of Americans gamble, a year, and that's a significant amount. But a lot of people don't have issues with gambling. So that's great. Go to the casino, go, play bingo at the church, whatever you do, just kind of keep that in mind. So this is also interesting. When we look at only 1% are estimated to meet the criteria, when I saw that statistic at first, I was like, well, that's not bad. I mean, it's not like substance use disorder where there's this huge high percentage. But then when you translate that into 2 million, it becomes very, very significant. So another 4 to 6 million would be considered to have mild to moderate gambling problems. So as a prevention person, when I go into the schools and on university campuses, my job is to provide that education piece, to share these statistics, share this research, and say, you just need to be aware of this. If addiction runs in your family, if gambling runs in your family, these are things that you need to be aware of. So we also look at the increased suicide ideation. And this was something that was very puzzling to me when I got into the particularly specific gambling field. I didn't really understand this until I went to a training. And Megan, I think it was the training that you and I were at, where they interviewed somebody, and this woman had been married, I don't know, for decades. Husband had done all their finances, paid the bills, did all of that. They had 2 kids, your typical family. She did not know anything was going on until she got a phone call saying that they were in trouble because they hadn't made their car payments for several months. And she was thinking, what do you mean? Like, of course, my husband's been paying, we've been paying for years on these car payments. Well, later on, they come and, her house was now in foreclosure. She was devastated. She had no idea what was going on. So not only had her husband been gambling all of this money, he had taken away all of the kids' college fund. They had no more savings. They had nothing. And I remember just sitting there thinking, what do you do with that? I mean, and I'm not saying at least, but I'm going to say at least with substance addiction, you see generally a progression. You see somebody who builds up that tolerance and they're using more and more over time. Gambling, a lot of times it goes back to that hidden addiction. Spouses, family members, loved ones are hearing things like this. A spouse just lost $60,000. Some of us don't even make that in a year. That's huge. So when we look at that, we look at the fact that sometimes the only out that people feel they have is to attempt suicide, to just, leave it all and not even deal with it. So when you look at that background and put it in context, it makes sense that suicide ideation and death by suicide is a lot higher with problem gamblers. So this is interesting. I don't know that I agree with this one, but on average, 50% of those affected by gambling problems commit crimes in order to support their addiction. Truthfully, and I'm not the counselor here in this situation, I think that's higher. Megan, you would probably know. I mean, I'm just thinking of some of the clients that I know, and it may not be a formal, maybe they didn't get caught, but I'm pretty sure that's higher. You think, Megan?
When it comes to money and what people will do, taking money from somebody with the promise of paying them back and not paying them back, is it a crime? Okay, maybe that's a strong word. I've worked with plenty of people that have committed and been caught and been charged for committing crimes to support their gambling addiction. I'd say 9 out of 10 people I've worked with have taken money from someone and not paid them back and probably have very little intention to pay them back. Now, if you call that a crime or whatever you call it, it's still something, right?
Yeah, and it's not okay, but that is what we're looking at with prevalence. So they also talk about for every problem gambler, 10 other people are affected. I think that might be low also. I'm just thinking of, I guess it's a stretch. So is the employer affected? Was the person embezzling? Did that cause, a business to go under? Well, there's even more people affected. Was it a parent? Was it a child? Is it a school situation where maybe a collegiate athlete is, gambling and betting and they lose their scholarship? They let down the team. So you can really look at this in a lot of different ways. And this I find really interesting. The likelihood of developing a gambling addiction increases 23-fold for people affected by alcohol use disorders. So a lot of times, and Megan, I feel like this is correct, 1 in 5 clients at Zeph, when they are screened for having a problem gambling issue, it is 1 in 5, correct, that we've discovered? So yeah, we look at that.
It's 20 to 25% of the people we screen at Zeph Center, based off their screen, would meet criteria for a gambling disorder. And so we invite them to join us if they're interested in joining our program.
Well, and that's one of the really cool things that I've learned at Zeph. We really do, well, we have the only problem gambling treatment in Northwest Ohio for what we do. But it's so much more than just sitting there saying, why did you gamble? How can we stop you from gambling? It's talking about finances. It's talking about coping skills. It's talking about the direct correlation between that gambling behavior and that substance use disorder or that mental health struggle. So it's a lot that Megan and Steve, our other gambling counselor, it's a lot that they talk about with their counseling. And that's one of the things we need to look at is that financial piece. So a lot of people have lost significant amounts of money. How are you going to repay that? Do you need to take a look at a budget? How is this affecting your relationships? Your spouse, your children, your parents, whatever the case is. So any questions? This is kind of powerful stuff here. Any questions or thoughts related to this? Okay, I'm not seeing anything.
Okay. So here's something I wanted to share with you that, again, I'll just let you use as a resource, but this is something I do in my gambling treatment groups that I do. So every now and then I give them a blank Venn diagram and I ask them to fill this in. And this is filled in based off of several groups I've done. So anything I put on here, a client has come up with themselves. You know, what are the similarities? What do alcohol, drug addictions have in common with gambling addictions? And then what is unique to each addiction? And it's interesting because while there are things that are unique to each addiction, look at the things they have in common. Isolation, crime, financial irresponsibility, thoughts of suicide, feeling desperate, low self-esteem, broken relationships, costly, mental health symptoms. And so what we talk about when we do this group is maybe you came to Zeph Center to get sober because you had a drinking or a drugging problem, and maybe you didn't know you had a gambling problem at the time. But what's the point of doing all this work to get sober from drinking and drugging if you're going to let the gambling addiction cause all of the same horrible consequences? You can only have one recovery. And so you've got to determine for yourself if that recovery is going to include gambling too. And so this is a powerful way to help people understand that a lot of the similarities of these addictions, that they have a lot in common. Where they're different, they're different. But what they have in common is all the really, really horrible stuff. Anything you want to add to this, Kelly?
Yeah, so when I went to my first gambling training, I was very intimidated because, like I said, I did not know anything about this. After the end of, it was a very intensive 3-day training. After the training, I felt a lot more comfortable because of exactly this. I realized I knew more about gambling disorder than I realized because I had worked in the substance use disorder field for so long. But like Megan said, there's some really unique things, but there's some really interesting shared similarities. And I think when clients do this, it helps them see the reality that gambling truly is an addiction. And that's what we talked about before, is some people just kind of, you know, look at it lightly like it's not an issue. But this is really, because I've seen Megan do this in group and it's very powerful for people.
Okay. And this is something that you could think about even doing in your recovery houses. And you know, switch out gambling addiction for something else if you want. Shopping addiction, sex addiction. Encourage the residents to identify what the other things they have to work on are in order to maintain this recovery and sobriety. Because you don't relapse because you're sober. You relapse because there's other behavioral problems that you haven't dealt with yet. So if they don't have a gambling problem, that's great. I don't want them to. But what other problems do they have that could cost them their recovery? Have them think about that, because that's what they really need to be addressing. So objective number 2, understand how sports betting intersects with gambling addiction. So you may or may not know, but sports betting in Ohio became legal at the beginning of this year. So we're about 5 months into legal sports betting in the state of Ohio. That doesn't mean people weren't sports betting in the state of Ohio before then. We're located in Toledo, which is about 10 minutes from the border of Michigan. So it's pretty easy, or it was pretty easy, to just drive into Michigan to place a bet on these sports books prior to the beginning of this year. And of course, we know that underground gambling is still going on too, but it officially became legal at the beginning of this year. And so I wanted to show you guys a little bit of the advertising that, if you haven't already seen it, I'd be surprised if you haven't. They've kind of flooded TVs, radios, and social medias, but these are what we're seeing, right? Bet $5, get 200 instantly. $100 in free bets if you sign up early. How tempting is that to somebody who doesn't have a job and really, really needs some money right now? I mean, that's tempting to me, and I have a job and I don't need the money, but it's tempting. Bet $5, get 200. $100 in free bets just for giving you my email address, right? Imagine how tempting that might be to one of your residents living in recovery housing. This is where that aspect of hope comes back into play of, well, I only have to wager $5 and then I get 200 more. And maybe that's what I need to win big, and then I can leave this recovery house and go get my own place. Really, really imagine how that would feel if you were living in recovery housing and you were being flooded with these advertisements. And then you can see in really small print, gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. They are required to put that there, but I don't think they're required to make it that small, but they do anyways. And so here's another kind of difference of gambling addiction and substance use. Yes, there are ads, advertisements for alcohol, but when it comes to illicit substance use, there's not advertisements like this on your Twitter, on your Facebook, on your TV while you're trying to eat dinner, on your way to work, listening to the radio, or seeing billboards. This is really, really in your face. And so for a lot of the people I work with who are trying to stop gambling, this is really difficult for them because they feel like they can't get away from it. Even once they've made the decision to try and stop, they can't walk 5 minutes without hearing or seeing a gambling ad. And so that's another kind of difference with gambling disorder, is that it's hard to eliminate from your life. Money in some aspects is their drug, and the world revolves around money. And so you can't just never have money in your pocket again. You've got to find a way to learn to live with it and to live with these advertisements. Kelly, anything you want to add?
Yeah, so my son is in college, and I remember it was like the second or third day in January, and he calls me and he said, "Hey mom, have you ever heard of this FanDuel thing?" And I'm like, "Elijah, do you know what I do for a living?" Which of course I did. And he goes, no, mom, they're giving all of us college students this deal. You bet, I don't know, whatever, and you're guaranteed $200. And I said, "Oh dear God, please tell me you didn't do this." And he goes, "No mom, it's cool. We're all doing it because we're going to put our winnings towards our student loans." So there was a tiny part of me as a mom that's like, okay, well, I mean, I guess at least you're saying that. But what happened is they were all doing this because, like Megan just said, it's free money, right? Free money. So very fortunate for him, he did really bring in like $800. So that was very significant. But then I had to sit down and have a very serious conversation with him and say, do you understand, which of course he does, because I'm his mom, that addiction, runs in your family, blah, blah, blah. Do you, understand the endorphins and all of this? But the problem is they put, whether it's DraftKings, FanDuel, all these other places are putting a ton of money into marketing, particularly on college campuses, because college students are one of the higher risk populations for, developing a problem gambling disorder. So I look at stuff like this and it almost reminds me of somebody with an eating disorder. You have to have food, right? You see food advertisement everywhere. How do you cope with that? Same with gambling right now. I mean, gambling, sports betting, it doesn't matter. It is everywhere. How do you handle that? And a lot of times my husband's in recovery. So if there's any type of different, alcohol advertising, he just doesn't look at it, or we go somewhere else, or, we don't deal with it. That's a lot easier to do than stuff like this, where it literally is in your face. I mean, on your phone, when you get gas, everywhere. And it's sucking people in, all kinds of good people that never would have done this before.
These YouTube links are links for some of the commercials that have been rolling out since the beginning of the year. And again, it just it glamorizes sports betting. There's celebrities in them. It makes you feel like it's normal, it's fine. It makes you feel like it's harmless. And for plenty of people, it is. but it's probably harmful for residents living in recovery housing. So sports betting is just another type of problem gambling. It's just another way to gamble. A slight difference here is that it's somewhat skill-based. So it's similar to poker in the sense that you feel like you kind of have an illusion of control over how the game is being played because you get to choose how you play poker, you're playing with other people. Sports betting is similar because you feel like you're making more educated decisions if you know the players or the team statistics. And so a lot of people will get really invested in the teams that they're betting on and the sports that they're betting on because they're looking to justify that they're making the right calls, right? If I know more about the team, then I'll make more bets that will win. And while there is a sliver of truth to that, ultimately it is all up to chance because you never know how the players are going to play or what's going to happen in the game. But it does kind of trick you into thinking you know more than you really do. Another thing about sports betting that is a little bit different than brick and mortar gambling is that you can sports bet on your phone. You can gamble on your phone in other ways too, but you can also sports bet live during the game. And so the manipulative part of that is that there is no buffer between risk and reward. You can just keep betting more money. There's no ouch, that hurt. I don't know if I want to do that again. It's just constant. Kind of the same reason casinos don't close, right? There is no buffer between taking a break if you don't want to. So yeah, this means people are gambling in your recovery houses. This means people are gambling in treatment groups. They're gambling in the lobby, waiting for their doctor's appointment. They're gambling at work. None of you would know if I had a sports betting app pulled up on my phone right now if I didn't want you to know. That's how easy it is to gamble. And that's also the dangerous part of it, is that it's just so easy. It skews your view of money. You can do it at any time you want, constantly if you do, and that makes it really hard to take a break. Okay, Kelly, we've got about 10 minutes for these last objectives. I think the last objective won't take long, but I just wanted to let you know where you are for time.
Perfect, perfect, thank you. So when we look at problem gambling, we look at sports betting as it relates to recovery houses. Where are you guys at? What would you like to see in your recovery houses? I mean, is it a matter of, no gambling, no scratch offs, no sports betting? What does that look like for you guys? So just put some things in the chat. And not just what you would like, what is realistic? I mean, as a prevention person, I'm sitting here saying there should be no gambling anywhere. Well, that's not realistic. I just would try to avoid having people go down this road. But thinking about what your goals are and what is realistic. So go ahead and put some things in the question thing here. Oh, I'm not seeing anything. Are you guys? Oh, there we go. Never thought about it. Yeah, I can totally relate to that. So you have a rule against any kind of gambling. It's hard to enforce. And in a couple slides, you'll see that I want to say it's only 20% of college campuses have any type of gambling related policies in place. That's a great question. Is gambling considered the same type as drugs? So obviously you don't allow alcohol and other drugs in recovery houses. Where do you stand with gambling? Open discussions about it and its consequences. I love that. How do you connect the steps with gambling? We're going to talk a little bit about Gamblers Anonymous. great points, you guys. So thinking, first of all, do you want to start on the basic foundational level? Do you have policies that are related to gambling? Most recovery houses, if somebody, you know, either comes to the house intoxicated or high or drops dirty, you have consequences to that. What are your consequences to somebody gambling? I don't know. Do you guys have anything in place? So this is interesting. You know, what do you do with that? What do you do when a resident, because I know at Zeph, you know, the residents are responsible for paying some of their housing. What happens when they have a job, but they're not able to pay their rent because they're gambling? What policies do you have in place? How do you address that? Can you be proactive? The person who said that you talk about this, great. That's wonderful. So just kind of thinking about things like that. Any other thoughts with that? Okay. So I like this. Gambling skews our value of money and manipulates us into thinking we'll win big if we just keep playing. Okay. So do you address gambling issues with your residents the same way you address substance use issues? Do you talk about that? Do you talk about tolerance? Do you talk about consequences? Do you talk about the fact that it's an addiction? It's just something to think about. Go ahead, Megan. Yeah, you can go with the next slide. There you go. So Megan actually found this. We did a presentation for BGSU. We've done a couple for BGSU for their athletic department, for their staff, for their students. I live right near BGSU, so I thought it was really cool to see right down the road. They do have at least some type of policy. Okay, it's illegal. They're not supposed to do it, especially when you're looking at collegiate athletes. So again, I'm going to throw this out to you guys. Does anybody that you know of have a policy related to gambling? Do you guys have that? If you do, wonderful, tell us about it. If you don't, why don't you? What does that mean? And how do you define that? I mean, look at the whole prison system. Wow, talk about gambling in the prisons, right? I mean, whether they're gambling for money or objects or cigarettes or whatever. Where do you draw the line? What do you allow? What's permissible? What is punishable? Do you know that? And if not, I think you need to start exploring that, because I guarantee this is not going to go away. Somebody asked us at a training we were doing, I think it was in like November. His question was, what do you think about the whole sports betting becoming legalized? And I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know what to think about that, because all these other states that went through this, they kept telling Ohio, it doesn't matter how well prepared you are not going to be well prepared. You're going to have such an influx of people with issues. And we're seeing that. And this is just the beginning, and it's only going to get worse. So as people in recovery houses, what are you going to do when it really starts to peak? Because I guarantee it's going to keep getting worse. Do you have those policies? Do you have those procedures? Who do you talk to about that? So any thoughts? Does anybody have a policy on gambling, gaming, anything like that? And this is actually taken from BGSU student athlete handbook. So they are not allowed to do this. I don't know if it's been updated since sports betting has become legalized, but does anybody have? Let me take a look in the chat. Does anybody have any policies? It's been discussed. You're going to discuss it now. Yay, great. You know what? Our job is done. That's what we want. That is what we want. We need to have these conversations. So letting people be aware.
I think something important to note is that having a policy and enforcing a policy are two different things.
Exactly.
And it really does start with frontline staff. The people that are seeing the residents and those clients the most have such an opportunity to educate them about the pros and cons of gambling. And I think it starts with your own view of it. We have counselors and employees here that might not think gambling is a problem. And I've heard stories about not necessarily at Zeph Center, but I've had clients say, yeah, you know, I'll be in the lobby and the receptionist is scratching off tickets.
Oh,
Or I'm getting a ride to my treatment group and the staff that is driving the bus wants to stop at the carryout
oh,
to get some tickets. And so what message are you sending your residents when you do this? You're sending the message that it's not a big deal, it's not a bad thing, and that it's okay to do. And so having a policy and enforcing a policy also applies to the staff too. If you're going to ask your residents not to gamble, you need to be asking your staff not to gamble at work or be talking about it at work as well. And so just something to think about is you do have an incredible ability to influence and educate your residents about behavioral addictions, but it kind of starts with what you think about them yourself.
great points. Great points. Yeah, so this is just an excerpt from BGSUs. So they actually have sports wagering and gambling as part of their policy. So Megan, do you want to just kind of gloss over this one? Because this is pretty self-explanatory.
Yeah, so this and the next slide are resources for you. If you are not a treatment provider, if you are not a licensed provider, you can still ask these questions. These are brief screens that you can easily look up on Google and print out for free. If you want to start having a conversation with your residents in recovery housing, start with a brief screen. Don't make them answer 100 questions. Don't sit them down for a 1-hour meeting. You know, offer some freebies, some candy, ask them to complete this 3-question screen. If they answer yes to any one of those questions, okay, maybe you think about talking to them a little bit more. Maybe you think about doing the SOG screening, which is 20 questions instead of 3. But if you want to start implementing this conversation into your recovery houses, start with a brief screen just to get a gauge on how many people living in your recovery house said yes to one or more of these questions. So many people think that gambling isn't happening in their community, and I promise you it is. You just don't know about it. It's a hidden addiction, very easy to hide. So this is the brief biosocial gambling screen. 3 questions, answer yes to 1. You probably want to ask more questions. You don't have to be a treatment professional to ask these questions. You can ask these questions, and if it becomes something that they may require treatment for, you can refer them. You can give them additional resources. But it's within your scope of practice as someone working at a recovery house to ask questions that are related to their recovery. LIBEC questionnaire is even shorter. It's only 2 questions. And if they answer yes to one of them, same thing. You might want to have a longer conversation with them. Again, you can print this out. Kelly and I go to our recovery house every couple months and bring our screening and freebies. And we just ask people to complete the screen and they can get a freebie afterwards. And this helps us understand how many people living in our recovery house might meet criteria for a gambling disorder. And then we can do our own follow-up with that because we have them write their phone number down. So we can call those people that screen high enough that we want to call them and ask some more questions. This is another screening. This is the screening we use at Zeph, which is called a SOGS screening, South Oaks Gambling Screen. You can find this for free on Google as well. We have our clients and residents complete this on their own. We print it out for them, we ask them to answer the question, and we score it for them afterwards. If they score a 5 or higher, they would likely meet criteria for gambling, and the highest you can score is 20. And yes, we do see 20 quite frequently. So this is also something that you could do if you want to have more of a conversation with your resident, but you're not sure where to go. Have them answer those questions and then review it with them. Ask them if they want help, if they need help. These are great ways to start the conversation, especially if you feel like, well, I don't know what to ask, I don't know what to do. Print some of these out and use that as a guide for your conversation.
And
Kelly,
also, yeah, and we can't emphasize enough the freebies, whether that's candy, whether that's little bags of cookies, whatever that looks like, it attracts people, you know, and just say, hey, in order to get this, you know, water bottle, take literally 4 minutes and complete this SOGS or complete this other whatever else you have there. Let them kind of feel empowered and that they're getting something out of it. The other thing related to this, if you don't have anyone on your staff that specializes in problem gambling, we now have telehealth across the state of Ohio. So this is something, and Megan is one of our counselors that works with people from all over. So this is something, I want to say Mary Haven is probably the closest to, I know John in Columbus, but depending on where you're at across the state, this is something that we can offer as well, is that telehealth for people who do have a gambling disorder, and our staff are credentialed. We hold that GAM endorsement that says that we have a specialty in that. So when we look at prevention, what do we need to look at? We need to look at recovery from everything. And when we look at that, we're looking at what kind of coping skills are in place, what kind of risk and protective factors. So when we look at risk factors, we look at, is there a family history? Are there traumas that somebody's dealing with? Are they already dealing with a substance use disorder and or a mental health disorder? So all of these things that we need to look at the big picture with. As a prevention person, I'm all about preventative maintenance. So I'm sitting here saying, okay, if you guys don't have policies and procedures, get them in place. You have to figure out how you're going to enforce those. You have to have these discussions. I guarantee it's a lot better and a lot easier with anything if you are able to be proactive instead of reactive, whether that's involved with problem gambling or substance use or anything else. So one of the things that we're really promoting at ZEP internally with our staff, as well as with our clients and our residents, is self-care. What does that look like? Being aware of what your limitations are, being aware of what maybe some temptations and triggers are, being aware that maybe going every single day to get a scratch-off ticket might be indicative of a problem later on. Having those conversations and not going at a person saying, well, I think you have a gambling disorder. Talking about those conversations, talking about some of those really easy screenings. This is one of the things I really, really love is if you look at this bold word, are you seeing positive is nowhere or positive is now here? So it's that perspective. So how do you see things? You might be sitting here going, oh dear Lord, now we have to deal with gambling at the recovery house. We're already dealing with this, this, and this. Now we have to deal with this. Okay, that's something that, depending on how you look at it, it could be a great opportunity for you to start addressing something and attempting to be proactive. So when we look at sobriety, it is the first step. And when we look at gambling, it's not always about abstinence. Sometimes it's about harm reduction and having those conversations with people as well. Any thoughts, questions? Yep, Megan, you want to do the next slide?
Yep. Okay, so this is the last objective. We will glaze over this just so we have enough time for Q&A, but wanted to make you aware of Gamblers Anonymous if you haven't heard of it before. I know that many recovery houses have requirements to go to meetings like Alcoholics Anonymous or NA or HA. This is also a 12-step help group, Gamblers Anonymous. They have their own 12 steps. They have in-person and virtual GA meetings, and they have their own screening tool called the Gamblers Anonymous 20 Questions. which you can access for free if you Google. So this would also be something where if you want to practice or try having the conversation of, is gambling addiction a problem for you? Get the GA 20 questions out. It's 20 yes or no questions, and have them do it in a meeting and see what you get. See what feedback you get. They also have multiple literature options for reading. So if you do work at a place that has enough funding to maybe give your residents big books or other recovery literature, maybe you think about if there's any room in the budget for GA literature, and just having that with all of the other recovery literature as a way to show that that it can become a problem and that you support your residents if that is a problem for them. Here is a list of local and virtual resources. You've got the Ohio Problem Gambling Hotline, the National Helpline. PGNO is a great resource if you want to look into more trainings. If you were really interested in this and want to learn more about gambling disorder, they have a calendar with trainings going on. All of our information for us at Zeph Center, you can call me at any time. You can email me at any time. Same goes with Kelly and Steve, who's our boss, and Allison, who is another counselor. And towards the bottom, you'll see virtual meetings. These are not necessarily affiliated with GA, but they are loosely linked, I'll say. But they're meetings that go on around the world. And so I've actually joined a few where I've been on a Zoom call with someone from England and someone from California and someone from Texas. And it's a great way for people to connect and talk about gambling recovery. And then also the last two here are kind of harm reduction tools. GamBan is a gambling banning software that you can purchase yearly or monthly for a very small fee. It will ban any gambling related software, apps, or games on any and all of your devices. And Timeout Ohio is the casino exclusion program where you can sign yourself out of the Ohio casinos for 1 year, 5 years, or a lifetime. And if you do the Timeout Ohio casino exclusion, you are essentially signing a document, a legal document stating that you are legally not allowed on the premises of any of the casinos in Ohio. So that is another harm reduction strategy that helps people stop going to the casinos because they're afraid of getting caught and having criminal charges. So those are some things that maybe you knew, maybe you didn't know, some resources to get you started. If you like podcasts, I gave you a whole bunch of podcasts on this slide. I've listened to several, not all of them, but all of them that I have listened to have been really great and educational. I always learn something new, and a lot of the times these podcasts have people, the podcasts are led by people in recovery from gambling, and they have guests on their podcast to do kind of probably what would be equivalent to a lead at a 12-step recovery meeting. They tell their story, what they learned, what they're doing now, what their recovery and what their addiction looks like. So great resources if you like podcasts. And do you want to talk briefly about BBAWNNO for a minute or two before we take questions, Kelly?
Sure. This is something that we created at Zeph because what we realized is we really are the experts in Northwest Ohio on problem gambling. We wanted to share those resources, whether that's prevention, treatment, recovery. So we created this behavior-based addiction and wellness network of Northwest Ohio, and it's actually extended all the way out to the Cleveland area and down to Columbus. We've had people from all across the state join us. So what it is we basically all network and we share information, not only related to problem gambling, but also holistic wellness. So we've done in-person meetings, we've done virtual meetings. This is something, if anybody is interested, you're welcome to join us. We meet every other month on a Friday from 11 to 12:30. and we share resources. We share information. You would probably find some good information related to what you guys do at a recovery house. So you've got you will have my contact information on the PowerPoint. So if anybody's interested in this, let us know. It's a really cool network to be a part of.
Okay, and then lastly, did you want to say anything about mental health moments? This is the last slide.
Sure. So when COVID hit, there's 2 of us in our prevention department, and we needed to figure out fast what we could do as an alternative because we work under grants and we had to produce deliverables and, goals and all of that. So our boss had a great idea to have our other prevention person start filming some videos. She calls them mental health moments. They're 3 to 5 minute videos that are on a variety of topics, anything from hope to show me your scars, to forgiveness, to grief. She also has a whole library related to problem gambling and gaming. She interviewed national and international experts, a lot of people from Ohio, a veteran in recovery that is one of the people that we've gotten to know through Zeph. Great resources. If you scan this QR code, it will take you right there. You'll see the library of everything that she has. These are being used across the nation and also internationally as well. We're up to almost 1 million views. Really, really cool thing. It would be a really neat thing to have some of these be shared in recovery houses. I know Megan has used them as prompts for group topics. They can be used for individual sessions. They can be used in your, lobby area. Lots of cool things. You can also just go to the Zeph Center Prevention YouTube channel and you can see all of the different options you have there.
Okay, with that, we'll take some Q&A and I'll stop sharing my screen if I can figure out how to do that. Did that work? Did I stop sharing?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay.
We got a couple questions come early on, and if you could just kind of give an overview, not that recovery housing is about treatment, but what would be the treatment for someone who's addicted to gambling? Just an overview.
Yeah, so here at Zeph Center, we offer individual treatment and we do 2 groups a week. For people in our program to attend groups, you have to have that gambling disorder diagnosis and be active in our program to attend the group. And then we offer individual in-person and telehealth services too. But a lot of the treatment is based in cognitive behavioral therapy and motivational interviewing. A lot of similar strategies that you might use when working with substance use. A lot of people think gambling disorder is like the redheaded stepchild, and it's really not. Some sessions we spend a lot of time talking about gambling, other times we spend 5 minutes on it. It's really a holistic recovery, and we know that gambling disorder is just the tip of the iceberg. It's what we need to handle first and foremost, but usually it's all that gunk underneath an addiction that needs to be handled for long-term recovery. And gambling addiction has its own gunk, just like substance use does too. And a lot of times it's rooted in loss, trauma, grief, conflict, mental health. Gambling disorder is just how it appears, just like for someone who might drink or drug or shop or gamble. It's just how it appears for them. And so it's rooted a lot in CBT and MI, but also just kind of getting to the root cause of the addiction itself.
Is there another question somebody said, and I think I get this, but I'm just going to read it. Is it possible to have gambling addicted person in the same household as recovery from drugs? So I'm interpreting that it's somebody who has a gambling problem. Could they be a resident in a recovery house?
Probably not.
Mhm.
From what I know, Usually those requirements for recovery housing are a substance use diagnosis. Now, there are a few places in the country that have residential treatment programs for gambling addiction. I know that the Cleveland VA is one of them. However, you have to be a veteran. And so if you're not a veteran, you can't go there. I think there's a few places in the west side of the country, like Arizona and California, that have some residential options for problem gamblers, but it's few and far between compared to the options for substance use. So as far as I know, you have to have a substance use disorder to come to our recovery house. I do wonder if that will change over time with behavioral addictions continuing to rear their ugly head. I wonder if there will be some systemic change in the future with that. But as of right now, I guess I would encourage you to take that to your own workplace and ask.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely.
Yeah, and also, I mean, that's a great question. There has been talk on the state level for the past 18 months about creating a residential treatment center for people strictly with a gambling disorder. So that is being considered. So
What about uh, older people? Is there a greater incidence of gambling as with older folks?
Oh yeah, definitely. I've worked with people as young as 21 and as old as 85. I mean, gambling disorder does not discriminate, just like every other addiction doesn't discriminate. But the older population is susceptible to a gambling disorder for several reasons. There's a great training that 1-800-GAMBLER actually did for on that topic of the senior citizen population and gambling disorder, and they talk about how you might be on a fixed income and you might want to make more money off of your fixed income. You might be very lonely and isolated and bored. You might be looking for excitement, and if you don't have the physical accessibility to do the things you want to do, you can still get that excitement from gambling, even if you have physical health limitations. So there's a great training on that by 1-800-GAMBLER that is probably recorded somewhere for free if you just Google it. But definitely they have they have unique vulnerabilities for those reasons.
well, and I remember when Megan and I went on a tour of the casino, Hollywood Casino here in Toledo, and it was the first time I'd ever been into a casino, and I was shocked at the number of older people. I mean, senior citizens and so many people, and I don't know that there's any research on this specific, but so many of the older people in wheelchairs and walkers, disabled otherwise. It was just really interesting, and to just see the sadness. They were not having fun. I mean, there was no joy, there was no laughter. It was definitely attempting to fill a void for a lot of the older people. And it was in the middle of the day. I think it was in the middle of the week, in the middle of the day, and just a significant number of senior citizens there.
So at your recovery house, your residents are agree to not gamble as part of their residency?
We wish.
Probably not.
Okay.
Probably
We are just a presence there, encouraging them to start dealing with this and having those conversations. And you know what? Just as you said that, John, I'm sitting here thinking, geez, Megan, does our house have a policy on gambling?
You know what? It's possible in the contract that residents sign when they agree to live at the house that it's in the terms and conditions that nobody reads. It is very possible. I have not seen the contract myself, but it's very possible that when you are signing your contract agreement to live at the recovery house and follow those rules, that one of those rules says that. Now I want to see our contract and read it for
I know.
myself. But it is, I level with people because it's hard to enforce. But just because it's hard to enforce doesn't mean we shouldn't try. And we may not be perfect with it, and we can't piss test somebody for their gambling. I get it. But we can at least have some educational conversations and help them in the moment if we are seeing active gambling going on in the moment. Now, do we need to buy Gamban for every resident's phone and make sure they never go to the casino? We can't do that. You know, we can't take away anybody's autonomy, but we can be a little bit smarter, and we can be a little bit more intentional. And the first step to doing any of that is just becoming aware yourself.
I don't see any more questions, so I'm going to comment on ORH and functionality of the webinar. There was supposed to be a handout feature for everybody to download the PowerPoint, and I cannot find it on my thing. I don't know if anybody could find it on their interface, but I don't see it. But if you email me, john@ohiorecoveryhousing.org, I'm happy to email you the handouts for today's session.
John, I do see it. If you look at that kind of menu and it says handouts and there's a little arrow, if you click
Okay,
on the arrow, it does bring up our PowerPoint,
great.
at
Well,
least
thank
at
you.
my end.
Yeah,
Sure.
great. I've been looking for it. I don't find it. And then I got somebody, for everybody watching, they asked if they could have a certificate of attendance. Again, email me if you want one. The good thing, everybody out there, that or the good thing or bad thing, is that the go-to platform measures your attentiveness to watching. So you do have to uh, score on that attentiveness to get a certificate attendance. And so the person that asked the question scored high. So just email me and I'll be happy to send you a certificate of attendance to this. And other people said they've got it, the handout, that is. So good news. Any last comments before we go? Because we're only a couple minutes away from 3:30. From Kelly or Megan?
I did see one question from Philip here. Does the casino ban contract cover the little pop-up casinos? And the answer is no. Those are internet cafes that, correct me if I'm wrong, Kelly, are not regulated
They are not.
by
They are not.
the Casino Control Commission. And so if you ever see every now and then, internet cafe got raided, that's what's happening. And so no, it doesn't cover those. And there's not one strategy we have for our clients to eliminate gambling from their life, just like there's not a strategy to eliminate drugs or alcohol from your client's life. But a lot of times it's putting up as many barriers as possible, right? When they tell you people, places, and things. It's the same thing with gambling. If you can minimize the people you gamble with, the places you gamble at, and the things you do when you're gambling, you have a much better shot at achieving your goal of either abstaining from gambling or really reducing it. So it doesn't ban those internet cafes, but it does ban you from all of the casinos and racinos in Ohio.
Well, John, thank you so much for inviting us. Hopefully you guys got a lot of good information that everybody's going to take back and now have all these policies and procedures.
Okay, well, we're going to say goodbye to everybody. And thanks again, Kelly and Megan, and hope to see you again soon.
Yeah, thank you
Sounds
so
good.
much.
Thanks, John. See you guys.
Bye-bye.